What a time to be alive. It seems like almost daily we're getting bombarded by a ton of Ryzen 6800U handhelds that are about to release or will release soon. For those that do not closely watch PC tech or are new to Windows handhelds in general, it might not be that obvious why this is a big deal. For that reason, and my own curiosity and excitement, I put together this video. Today we're going to try and get a better idea of what the 6800U can do at various performance thresholds. To do that, we will need to enlist the help of a device that has this processor, and thankfully, I was able to borrow a new 6800U laptop for this purpose. Not only is this laptop one of the first 6800U devices out of the gate, it also has some important similarities to some of the devices that are on the horizon. Let's start off by going over the specs of the testing device. The HP Elitebook 835G9 comes with the Ryzen 6800U processor. This is an 8-core, 16-thread CPU with a max boost clock speed of 4.7 GHz. Our GPU is the star of the show, and it is an AMD Radeon 680M with 12 GPU cores and a max clock of 2.2 GHz. For RAM, we have 16 GB of DDR5 4800, and we have a 51 watt-hour battery. There are obviously other specs, but these are the most important ones for this video. I don't want to spend too much time on the laptop itself, but there are some important points to go over. This is a thin and light business laptop, so it won't represent 100% of what this processor can do, but it can adequately show us what kind of performance we would see in a handheld device. Beyond having a metal chassis to help with some slight heat dissipation, this implementation of the 6800U comes with some ports that would be beneficial on a gaming device. If we take a look inside, we can see some of the most important design elements of Windows handhelds. That is primarily going to be the battery and the cooling solution. The battery on this guy comes in at 51 watt hours, which is pretty close to what you'd find in the next crop of 6800U handhelds. Some devices will have bigger batteries than this, and some will have smaller ones, but this is close to the ideal size that you'd expect to see paired with this processor. The next important thing is the cooling, and this isn't a strong point on this laptop when it comes to high-end gaming because it is a thin and light device. We have an average fan size here with a heat pipe leading away from the CPU to the front of the fan. The diameter of this fan is slightly smaller than something you'd see or you'd hope to see in a Windows handheld, and the amount of copper used and the heat path is not as ideal as what I think we will see going forward on handhelds. I'll talk more about the impacts this has on our TDP in just a moment, but I will say that I have tried to give this the best chance of success by propping up the back half of the laptop to increase airflow to the bottom air intake. To get a better overview of what we can expect from this processor, I went through and did a bunch of benchmarks. Synth benchmarks aren't the end-all or be-all for a gaming device, but they can tell you where your processor is the most efficient, and they can give you an idea of how your performance will scale at different TDP levels. TDP stands for Thermal Design Power, and it is measured in watts. In these examples, we are telling the processor the maximum amount of power that it can use for a given task, and then it is going out and attempting to deliver the best performance possible at that level. Without these controls, the processor would revert to the TDP set by the factory, which in most cases is going to be much higher than what you need when you want to get the most performance possible for your battery life. Starting things off, we have the Heaven benchmark, and I ran this test starting at 5 watt TDP and did 1 watt increments up to 20 watts to judge how the performance of the 6800U scales. Taking a look at the full graph, we can see that there's a fairly steady increase in performance, but two areas stand out. The first is a group of TDPs starting from 9 watt and going up to 12. In this range, each additional watt of power gives you a sizable increase in performance. The second jump happens when we move from 13 watt to 14 watt. After that, there are only small increases in performance with each additional watt. When it comes to efficiency with this benchmark, we are getting the best performance per watt at 12 watt, 14 watt, and 11 watt in that order. Between 14 watt and 20 watt, the efficiency drops by 20%, and if we go down from 11 watt to 5 watt, we lose 40%. I also ran a bunch of Geekbench 5 tests, but these were only done at 5 TDP levels. Surprisingly, single core performance is pretty good between 10 and 15 watt, which will be great for emulation at lower TDP levels. Multi-core takes a much more rapid increase as we feed the beast with more TDP. GPU performance seems to follow this same trend, with the only interesting discovery being that I got higher benchmark scores with OpenCL compared to Vulkan, and that's probably due to new drivers from AMD. So, we have covered our testing device, our specs, and some benchmarks. Now it's time to cover the most important thing, gaming performance. We are going to go about this a bit differently for this, And there is a good reason for that. 6800U is an exciting chip, and I think the tendency is just to show it off at max power where it can perform the best, but this isn't always a reasonable thing to do in a gaming handheld. For that purpose, we are going to test games at 3 different TDP levels. Our lowest TDP level will change depending on the game, and this is going to be the minimum TDP value I could find that would allow the processor to run a game at 720p with minimum settings. Up from there, we are at 15 watt, which is the de facto 2 hours of battery life setting. Some devices will have far less than 2 hours of battery life at this TDP, but it is a solid performance level to strive for in a handheld. Our final TDP value is 25 watts, and that is the highest sustained TDP that is supported on this laptop. That is also why I stated this laptop cannot represent the full performance potential of this processor, because it should be able to go a bit higher than this, and I don't think 30 to 32 watt will be out of the question when this processor is inside a mini PC. In a handheld, 25 watt or more would net you a little over 1 hour of battery life, so 25 watt is going to be my plugged into a wall threshold. For our first game, we have Battlefront, and at 25 watt we can play this game at 1080p with the settings set to high. Dropping down to 15 watt, we can keep these same settings. This game is fairly optimized, and the lowest TDP value that I could find for a smooth 720p experience at low settings is 7 watt. When picking these minimum TDP levels, I am looking to get at least 30 FPS. If you're willing to mess with scaling, you could probably go down further from my minimal levels. Our next game is Final Fantasy VII Remake, and our 25 watt TDP gives us 1080p with the graphics set to high. This game uses dynamic scaling when the FPS cap is over 30, so this won't always be a true 1080p scale in busy areas. It's not that noticeable at 25 watt, but if we drop down to 15 watt and leave all these settings the same, you can see the scaling going to work with some slight drop in picture quality. This drop would be less obvious on a smaller screen than it can on this video.
Get ready. Let's go.
With the use of low-end mods, we could definitely get lower than 12 watts without the use of dynamic scaling, but this is the lowest TDP that I tested. Up next, we have Hollow Knight. At 25 watt with default settings, we get over 250 FPS. If we drop down to 15 watt, we get around 190 FPS. The minimum TDP that I was able to find with this resolution still set to 1080p was 6 watt. This gives us around 60 to 80 FPS. At this TDP level, our GPU is basically asleep with the clock speeds locked to 200 MHz. Now let's move on to one of my favorite testing cases. Here we have Resident Evil 3 at 25 watt TDP with the resolution set to 1080p, and we are using the graphics priority preset. These clips are a bit longer, and I try to film the same thing at different TDP levels so you can see the difference in performance and picture quality. At our 2 hour battery life TDP, we can still maintain 1080p resolution, but we have to drop to the performance priority preset option. Our minimum TDP level for smooth 720p gameplay at the lowest settings is 8 watt.
Topside yet?
Working on it. More survivors. We've got to get that train moving.
When it comes to Cyberpunk 2077, it took a bit more work to find the ideal combination of settings to get good performance. At 25 watt with the resolution set to 1080p, using the high preset and FSR set to ultra quality, we got an average of 24.29 FPS. After getting this bad result, I dropped the graphics down and that gave me an average FPS of 35.68. After this, I dropped the TDP down to 15 watt and changed the graphics to low. This gave me an average of 32.77 FPS. The lowest combination of settings that I was willing to use with 10 watt TDP at 720p gave me an average FPS of 31.5 FPS. Outside of the benchmark, I decided to use medium settings with 25 watt TDP because that gave better performance than high in the city. Let's move over to a game that is not particularly optimized for these mobile APUs. Here's Final Fantasy 15 at 25 watt. Our resolution is set to 1080p and the graphics settings are set to low. Moving down to 15 watt, we need to change our resolution to 720p to maintain decent FPS.
There are worse vices, I suppose. What the hell? I think we're in for a fight.
Our minimum TDP for this game at 720p is going to be 11 watts. In busy battles, you are going to dip down into the 20s, but this will give you an average of 30 FPS. Sekiro also took a bit of fiddling to find optimal settings at different TDPs. 25 watts gives you just enough power to get an average of 30 FPS with the resolution set to 1080p and the graphics set to max. Dropping the TDP down to 15 watt from here without changing anything will give you between 20 to 30 FPS in this main area. Because of that, I had to drop the graphics setting down to low, which gives a very smooth experience in this main area. Our lowest TDP value for this game comes in at 10 watts, which gives decent 720p performance. I wasn't that happy using the max preset at 25 watt, so I bumped it down to high for a big boost in average FPS. Shadow of the Tomb Raider has a built-in benchmark that serves our purpose as well. At 25 watt TDP with the graphics set to low, we can get an average of 40 FPS. At 15 watt TDP, we can use a rendering resolution of 1080p with the graphics set to their lowest values. This also gives us an average of 40 FPS. Our minimum TDP value for this game is 10 watt. At this level, we can set the resolution to 720p for an average FPS of 33. Now let's look at 25 watt performance at 1080p low settings.
Jonah, I made it.
I'm on my way in. Almost there.
Sorry I didn't wait. Be careful.
Hey, Sammy. How's it going?
Yeah, this is Commander Rourke. Dominguez wants confirmation Croft is here. You have
into the ruins. Should be far enough out of earshot.
No, please. Don't make this harder than it is.
Please, no. I have money.
Hades is very easy to run on this processor at low TDPs, so I only have two values for this section. At 9 watts, we can get over 60 FPS at 1080p. With 25 watts, we can get around 200 FPS. Let's take a look at LEGO Star Wars. Here's 25 watts at 1080p with the graphics set to high.
They're here! Stop them!
For our 2-hour TDP level, we have 15 watt at 1080p with the graphics set to low.
Go, go, go! They're here! Stop them!
The lowest TDP value that I found for smooth performance in this game was 9 watt with the resolution set to 720p. Given that this is a Switch title, this is an interesting title to test. With Monster Hunter Rise, we can get good performance down to 10 watt TDP with the resolution set to 1080p and the graphics set to low. At this TDP, our GPU is almost asleep, but we can still get great performance.
Oui.
I skipped over 15 watt for this and went right to 25 watt. This allows us to use the average preset while maintaining the same good performance.
That's my aim!
Mine now.
Here we have Death Stranding at 25 watt 1080p with the default settings. At 15 watt, we can bump the graphics down to medium to maintain the same performance. Our lowest TDP for this game is 11 watt at 720p with the graphics set to the lowest settings. God of War is the only game in this list that had native support for FSR2, and we will use it for each TDP value in this section. This game is also a bit different, with 15 watt being the lowest value that I would use for this game before the picture quality turns into mush.
Father, why are we doing this now?
I need to know you can survive the journey. This way, boy.
Hup! Wow. Froze it in place.
For Red Dead Redemption 2, we are going to solely use the in-game benchmark. At 25 watt with the resolution set to 1080p and the graphics set to low, we get an average FPS of 32.8. If we change only the TDP to 15 watt and keep everything else the same, our average FPS drops to 24.1. For this game, the lowest TDP that I would bother using is 15 watt with the resolution set to 720p. This gives us an average FPS of 38.3. Let's wrap up this video focusing on PC gaming performance with the 6800U. Obviously, this chip can perform well at 1080p when you feed it a lot of power. But what I hope you take away from this video is that it is also great in the 10 to 15 watt TDP range. In that range, it easily outperforms older Windows handhelds from the last 2 years or so. We did not focus on a lot of older PC titles in this video, but you can expect a lot of those games to function well in the sub 10 watt TDP range if you want to use 1080p scaling. This video was a ton of work to put together, so if you enjoyed this showcase, please consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like down below. It really helps out the channel. Our next video on the 6800U will focus on emulation performance, so make sure to hit the bell icon so you don't miss it when it drops. Happy gaming everyone, Taki out.